Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Happy 4th of July. It was an issue that came up recently. I'm not educated enough to speak about it, and I really shouldn't speak about it. So don't take anything I say seriously, because I shouldn't be talking about it. But I'm going to talk about it anyway. It came to my attention from my friend Rabbi Shermeza. I didn't even know about what had happened. That the Eidah Chared is removed the hechsher from certain runs of Barkan Wine on account that they questioned the validity of certain people who were working together with the wine. So we have to understand and a whole storm came about online from certain people. I usually don't have much of a problem with Dr. Nathan Cardoza Lopez, whatever his name is. I like a lot of the things he has to say, although I don't agree with everything. I enjoy reading his writings, but this that he wrote about concerning the whole issue, suggesting that we should just do away with kosher wine. It's a very problematic thing to say. I say that in a respectful way, and I can honor and respect those who might want to take a lenient opinion to a certain extent, but then the problem with him is then he invents new things that have no source, and it's quite problematic what he had to say about this. All of this came up because, well, let's first of all talk about what is kosher wine. It's the same with wine and grape juice. In order for wine or grape juice to be kosher, it can only be prepared by pious Jews. I bring the word pious Jews to show that this is not a racial issue. One can be born Jewish, but if they are not pious and they touch the wine is not kosher. If they don't keep the Sabbath, wine is not kosher. And furthermore, it's not a racial issue for the simple fact that anyone from any race can convert to Judaism. And again, the same issue of piety comes up. If the convert is not keeping the laws, their conversion might still be valid, despite what many people say. However, the same rules apply to the born Jew who is not pious as to the convert who is not pious. That really essentially the heretical born Jew doesn't count for the minyan, his wine is not kosher, and so forth. His shechita is not kosher, and so forth. If he would write a mezuzahs or tefillin, he's not considered a Yerushalayim. It's not kosher, and so forth. And so it's not a racial issue. The question came in about the Ethiopian Jews. Who they are exactly, what they are they actually Jews, are they not Jews? And there are many, many different opinions in the rabbinical world, and each, we have to understand, we don't have a central authority in Judaism. What we essentially have is a congregational polity, We don't have a pope, we don't have bishops and all these things. Our last binding earthly authority was the Sanhedrin. That is what is binding for the whole Klal Yisrael, for every Jew, are the rulings of the Sanhedrin. And since the Sanhedrin has been disbanded, all we have are our local congregational polities. And so there's no one chief rabbi who has authority over all Jews. Each congregation has the choice to accept or reject some particular local rabbi. And as is generally done, people will generally accept, if you're a member of a particular community, those communities might band together to accept a particular authority as the authority for their community, perhaps above and beyond their own local rabbis. And so, for example, you have how these certain groups will band together and they will accept certain rulings when contemporary questions come up. And so essentially the question of the Ethiopian Jews is essentially a contemporary question, because these groups were unknown for a long time to most of the Jewish community. And so the question as to whether or not they are accepted as Jews is one question, but then there's a separate question, and both of these questions have to be addressed. Because if they were not Jews, the remedy would be relatively simple. They could convert. And if they want to be part of the Jewish people, each individual on their own could choose to convert. And then there would be no question that these people are Jewish. And if they live a pious lifestyle, there's no question. Doesn't matter what color they are. But there's no question, according to all opinions, that the wine would be kosher. There comes a different issue with the Ethiopian Jews. The bigger problem is if they are Jewish. And since they did not accept the authority of our Sanhedrin because they were unaware of it, they had separated from the Jewish people at such an early stage in history that the later rulings of our Sanhedrin were unknown to them. They didn't keep in communication with our community, just like any other religious community. You know, if you, even in civil law in America, if you want to be worthy to certain laws and rules from a civil aspect in America, a free country, a country with freedom of religion, and you want to have some of the privileges of clergy, you want to serve as a chaplain in a government institution, you want to you want to what do you call it? You want to sign a marriage license and have that marriage be recognized by the government and so forth. Depending on the state, each place is different. But you have to have communication, communion with your religious community. You have to be part of the religious community. And since the Ethiopian community did not have that communion with the mainstream orthodoxy, they essentially developed a new religion. A religion that's very similar to Judaism, and yet has certain aspects in which it is a separate and distinct community, a separate and distinct religion. I'm not not saying they're going to hell because of that. What I'm saying is that we have laws, we have canonical laws, we have halacha that guides us as far as our religious laws go. And these are things that we have to take seriously. Because otherwise our community falls apart and we're no longer the community that we were. And there is room within halacha to be fluid. There is fluidity within halacha. The word halacha itself is cognitive to halicha, to movement, to going, to walking. It is a path that we walk on, and it's not written in stone. However, certain things are and certain things are not. And on a certain level, each local community has their right to make a decision whether or not they want to accept, how they want to accept certain things. For a long time, my understanding was, I'm not sure what the sources are for this, but the Eidach Haredis, which is a body that I have the utmost respect for, and it's a body that has fought against racist movements, so to call them racist is absolutely ludicrous. The UN declared Zionism to be racism in the 1970s, and the Eidach Haredis is well known for their fight against Zionism. Whether you agree or disagree, it's quite obvious that by the definition of how we define racism in the world, how the UN defined racism, this is an anti-racist organization, the Eidach Haredis. But we'll put that aside, because I know people are very emotional about these things. They don't think about them intellectually, or rather emotionally, particularly when it comes to Zionism. But really, this is what this is all about. It's very similar to how people are attacking Donald Trump, even though he's doing everything they want him to do, they would want a president to do, but just because they hate Donald Trump, they just are attacking him out of emotional reasons instead of intellectual reasons. And so too, everyone always looks for excuses to attack the Eidach Haredis, because it's a pious, good Jewish organization that fights against Zionism, and since so many Jews are brainwashed by Zionism, that's why they want to fight against. They want to look for any excuse to fight against the Eidach Haredis. But then we see how it goes even further. People write things online that they want to get rid of keeping kosher altogether because they see keeping kosher as racist, which it isn't. I proved that it's not, by virtue of the fact that if you can be born Jewish and your wine is not kosher, and you can convert to Judaism from any race and your wine is kosher. Now, what's the issue with the Ethiopian community? Again, we have to go back to what we said about the congregationalist polity of the Jewish community. Each congregation has their rabbis who make decisions about how we deal with certain contemporary questions that were not addressed in ancient times. And so the question, and apply the laws to our current situations. Now, lest one think that this is an anti-Zionist issue, none other than Rabbi Meir Kahana wrote an article in support of, more or less, and explaining the position of the Eidach Haredis on this issue. But we have to be honest that there are different opinions within the Orthodox Jewish world. Each opinion is fit for their own congregation. And so the Eidach Haredis is a separate and distinct congregation, which tends to be strict on a vast myriad of issues. And so therefore, you can be certain, if you're buying something from the Eidach Haredis, that it meets all of the strictest opinions. And so even those who disagree politically with the Eidach Hareidis look up to the Eidach Hareidis as a standard bearer of the strictest opinions. And this is how they've always been known, and this is their mark, as opposed to the chief rabbinate of Israel, the so-called chief rabbinate of Israel, I would say, in which is known to be lenient. And many people, even people who might identify politically with the ideology of the chief rabbinate, the so-called chief rabbinate of Israel, will not eat their kosher standards because they know them to be lenient. And then even among the chief rabbinate, within their own kosher agencies, they differentiate between, I remember some years ago, I don't know if it's still around, but there is Rabbanut Mahadrin, that there is this strict opinion, but still, the Eidach Hareidis always has been more strict on all of these issues than for most issues. There are certain issues that they are lenient on, which they believe it to be strict. For example, machine matzah, the American tradition of the stricter opinions, the Satmar would not allow machine matzah, and the Eidach Hareidis would allow machine matzah. And when people ask the Satmar Rav, could the Sachtus Rabbonim, which is a separate independent organization from the Eidach Hareidis, but is essentially the equivalent, for lack of a better term, of the Eidach Hareidis in America. They asked the Satmar Rav if the Sachtus Rabbonim could give a hechsher. For the most part, it's very hard to find any matzah with the hechsher of the Sachtus Rabbonim. And generally, it's the individual dayanim who give hechsherim on matzah. But they asked if the Satmar Rav if he would give a hechsher on matzah, and he said no. But if on machine matzah, he said no, it's against his tradition to do so. But if you need to have machine matzah, so you can have from the Eidach Hareidis. But we'll put these aside for now, these issues. The real main issue that we're dealing with here is this question of the Ethiopian Jews. So the Eidach Hareidis said we have a problem on both sides. If they're not Jewish, they're not Jewish. So then they could convert. But what if they are Jewish? And if they are Jewish, and they had been marrying all these years, and it's much easier in Jewish law to be married than it is to be divorced. So if their marriages were valid, and their divorces were not valid, then there's a question on all of the Ethiopian Jews. They could be mamzerim. There's no way to convert out of being a mamzer other than for the mamzer to marry a non-Jewish woman and the child to convert. Meaning that the woman does not convert. And so if the mamzer marries someone Jewish, and they're involved in this relationship that's against the Torah, so then they cannot be labeled as a pious Jew. So even if they are Jewish, and even if they're Shomer Shabbos, but they are engaged in a questionable relationship publicly, that would also make their wine not kosher. Because they're publicly involved in a relationship that's questionable according to halacha. If it was a private issue, it's a private issue. There's no way for us to discuss that. But if it's public, it's public. And so that would be a reason why the wine would not be kosher. Now, there are different opinions. There are those opinions that say they're not Jewish and they could convert, and their conversions are valid. And most of them go through some kind of a conversion process, and they adopt the Orthodox standards of life. But like we said, the Eidach Hareidis would not accept those as being Motor Lavo B'Kahol, because it's a question of Mamzerus. Chacham Avadi Yosef is the most lenient opinion as vis-a-vis the question of the Ethiopian Jews. And I myself have relied on them, especially when dealing with Sephardic Jews and their relationships with the Ethiopian Jews. Still, they generally will undergo some kind of a conversion. But the Eidah Chareidis is not being racist in saying that the Ethiopian Jews are not valid for the issue of touching wine. It's an issue of halacha, and their opinion is their halachic opinion that they follow, and they have every right to follow, and they're not bound to follow the leniency of Chacham Ovadia, who interestingly says they are Jewish and that their marriages were not kosher, and so therefore there's no worry about their divorces not being kosher. That's essentially the opinion of Chacham Ovadia, and that's the lenient opinion that exists in the Jewish world about the Ethiopian Jews. And so if the Rabbanut, which would follow, especially the Sephardic Rabbanut, which would follow the opinion of Chacham Ovadia, they would accept that, and everyone has the right to follow their rabbis, because we operate under a congregationalist polity. That's how Judaism works today. We don't have one central authority. But again, it's not fair to accuse the Eidah Chareidis of racism just because they have a different halachic opinion than Chacham Ovadia. Because Chacham Ovadia also was not basing this issue on race, but on his halachic opinion. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comments. All the best.